Today we are sitting in Scott Pagel's office at the Jacob Burns Law Library at GW Law, exploring his life and career in law librarianship. Scott is the Associate Dean for Information Services, Director of the Law Library, and Professor of Law at GW. Scott, it is our custom to begin these conversations by asking for a little personal history. I know that you grew up in Southern California. Could you please tell us about your family and your pre-college years?
Okay. I grew up in Fullerton, California. My parents were from the Midwest, Michigan and Wisconsin. I was the third of four children, two brothers, one sister. And my parents were teachers, and I was there until 18 when I went off to Michigan State.
And how did you choose Michigan State?
It was sort of the family school. My mother had gone there, my sister had gone there. My mother's whole family was in Michigan, so it was sort of a logical choice. At the time, I was pre-med. They had a good pre-med program. That didn't last long, but I went to Michigan State because it was sort of the family school.
So after pre-med, what did you change your major?
Well, I took one of these. I didn't like the sciences, I discovered, so I took one of these career exams in my freshman year, and the first occupation was librarian, and I said, yes! This is accurate. This is what I want to do. And my parents immediately said, no, you're not going to be a librarian, we'll disinherit you. Because they probably had an image of the bund person at the desk in the public library. And so we agreed on math education, because I was also taking lots of math, and they were teachers, so they understood being a teacher. And then I changed over to English education. But I worked in the college library, and then when I finished my degree in English, I didn't really want to teach, and I went back to, okay, I'm going to be a librarian. So I worked for a few more years in the circulation department, in the reference department. And
this was at Michigan State?
This was at Michigan State. So sort of getting my pre-professional training, and then started my master's at Michigan.
So what jobs did you hold? Like what departments were you working in? When you were at MSU?
I worked in circulation for a couple of years, so I knew all about how that works. Then I moved over to the reference department, supporting the reference staff in what they do, and that's where I really learned a lot from my supervisor in the reference department, Mrs. Hickok, in terms of how you should treat employees. She was a wonderful woman. She let me have the craziest schedules possible so that I could get my master's degree. We were under a contract, and so if you started after a certain time, they had to pay you overtime. So I came in, worked half an hour in the morning, drove to Ann Arbor, worked, took my degrees, came back, worked until 9 or 10 at night, and she was just fabulous. She let me do the strangest things to get my degree. She was very supportive, and I learned a lot just about human relations in the workplace from her.
So did you work there throughout the entire time you were at
Yes.
University?
Yeah, it's normally a year-and-a-half program. I took 2.5 years, so that I went part-time. And it was kind of sad. I couldn't really participate in the life of the student in library school, but I was getting practical experience, which I think really, that's been how I've gone all the way through my career, is, when I was a student at Michigan State, I worked in the stockroom of the library. So I have done everything from being a stock boy to being a clerk to being, cataloger to on and on. And I think that's what gives me sort of a well-rounded overview of what a library does, what is needed in the library, how to keep it going.
That's great. Now, did you choose the University of Michigan just because of proximity, or
Yes.
were there other reasons?
Yes. So, and it was, I loved it. I loved getting the degree. Margaret Leary was the director of the library then. I had her when she first taught legal research in the library school. It was an awful commute. At first I just did it 3 times a week, but by the end I was doing it every day. And in the beginning I did it with somebody else. She eventually dropped out, so I was doing it by myself. I had to buy a car just to do it, so.
So your first librarian position after graduating from library school, was that at Golden Gate?
No. In Michigan, Cooley Law School had just opened a few years before I graduated in 77. And it was in Lansing. And I got a job there as documents librarian, which did not require a law degree, just a master's. So I was documents librarian, which also enabled me to do some cataloging, ordering materials. I learned the acquisitions process. And it was very interesting at a startup law school, where they were still doing construction on the building, an old Masonic temple, and a new staff.
How many staff were there when you started?
Well, there were 4 professional librarians. I was one of 4 librarians, the director, head of acquisitions, cataloger, and the reference librarian myself. So it was a small staff, very small, building the collection, buying lots of sets of periodicals from reporters from Hine, the old-fashioned way, to start from nothing. Developing policies, doing everything manually, no online catalog still. So it was the old-fashioned way. And it
Great
was
way to learn.
Great way to learn. I learned a lot. I also learned how not to treat people. When, for example, my director at the time got very upset with me because I wrote an article without asking his permission. And so I learned, other things in that position. And but I loved it. I loved working in a law library, and I knew I had to get my law degree to continue. And during the convention, I forget what year, in San Francisco, while I was there, I visited some of the law libraries and met Nancy Carroll Carter at Golden Gate University, and wrote her a little later and said, "If you ever have any openings?" And so we corresponded, and eventually I moved out to San Francisco to start my law degree. And I really look at Nancy Carroll Carter as the main force in my development as a law librarian.
So was the initial moment the meeting at the conference, or just through your correspondence with her?
Well, as I say, I went around to some of the libraries, so I met her at the library, not at the conference. I went in and just introduced myself and said, I'm Scott Pagel, I'm a librarian. I'm thinking about moving to San Francisco. And so we continued correspondence. And when she had a position, she contacted me. And it was a bit of a risk. It was not a professional position. It was, and it was not a permanent position. She had somebody going on maternity leave as the serials assistant who checked in on the old filing system was going on maternity leave. And so I went out and accepted that position with the plan of going to Golden Gate. Eventually it became a permanent position. And so I started there in 80 as an assistant and not as a professional. So it was a step down, but it was a way to start law school on a part-time basis while
So had
working
you
full-time.
already been accepted into law school by the time you decided to move, or you moved first and then?
I moved first. But I knew I had this outrageous LSAT score, where I could have gotten into any place. So I knew I was going to get in. It's just, it was, okay, I need a job to support myself. And it also paid some of the tuition, so I could start. And so I worked 2 years, I worked full-time while going to school part-time at Golden Gate. And then I, aced all my courses, and so I thought, well, what do I want to do at this point? So I went and talked to the folks at Berkeley and cut back on my schedule, so I was working less than half-time, and started there full-time for my last 2 years. So it was, so I was working part-time in San Francisco, commuting to Berkeley to go to school there full-time. And again, it was wonderful. People like Herman Hill Kay for sex discrimination and for conflicts. I loved the experience there. But I continued to work in the libraries. I knew that I was going to be a law librarian. I never had any plans to practice, but it was a completely different world from Golden Gate. The classes were very different, much more rigorous. But I went full-time then for 2 years while working part-time. And while doing that, then some professional positions opened up at Golden Gate, so I then became the documents librarian there, part-time, and then eventually the head of public services part-time until I finished. And then when I finished my degree, I became the head of public services full-time at GW, and did that for just another year and a half or so before I went to Columbia. So.
And was it harder or easier for you that you returned to school after you had had significant experience compared to all of your other colleagues or classmates?
Well, it was different because I was. Well, it's interesting. When I took writing and research, I was basically given the answers to the instructor. He would come up with a problem, and then he would come to me and say, "Now, what have you done?" Because I knew research back and forth from having, been a librarian in a law library for 3 years at Cooley before going out to San Francisco. So, but it was and research was fun. So when I went to my first day in torts, they were going over a problem in the book. And, I had looked up the case and found, what eventually happened. I knew how to do the research part of it. So, but it was learning the law that I needed. And, but it was a little different in law school because I had no plans to practice, and all my colleagues were doing summer work at this firm or that firm or this court or that court, and I was just, during the summers I worked full-time at the library. Because that's what I planned to do for my career, and so it was. I was a different law student, but.
Now, from head of public services, did you then move to Columbia?
Yes.
As assistant law librarian, and you managed a much larger workforce
yes.
Than you had before.
Yes.
Could you describe that experience as well as acclimating to New York City?
Well, I love New York, and it was wonderful in that as a librarian you got faculty housing. So I lived right across from campus. So it was a 2-block walk, no subways, no hassles. New York was going from San Francisco to New York was not that difficult. It was a little more frenetic, but it was wonderful. And working at Columbia was fantastic. Jim Hoover was a dream boss to work for. He, again, let me do so much to develop. I was active in AALL and chair of a couple of SISs during that period and chair of the SIS Council during that period, and wrote a lot of articles during that period, and just spent hours upon hours of my own time in the rare book room learning about, going through classic bibliographies of English works and then finding them on the shelf and looking at them. So it really gave me an opportunity to learn what a great collection was about. At Cooley and Golden Gate I had worked with good collections, but nothing to compare with the collection at Columbia. Though Nancy, one of the things I learned from Nancy was how to develop a collection. Given the tiny budget she had, I learned from her so many things, such as the AALS list of recommended books that she used to purchase materials from, how to evaluate materials, how to really select, and how to build a collection as much as you could with a small budget. and then to go to Columbia and have this fabulous collection and really learn about, you know, international law materials and rare books. It just built so well on what I had learned from Nancy. And as I say, the freedom that Jim gave me to develop. It was an incredibly exciting time, you know, tiring, but really exciting to do all those things and to be so involved in the profession. Nancy had also taught me the importance of writing as a librarian, what a real professional librarian was about in terms of service, in terms of sharing with the community. And she had worked on a couple of articles with me. We had co-authored, and so then when I got to Columbia, I started writing. I did a lot on legal bibliography at Columbia. And I think I still hold the record as the longest article ever published in the Law Library Journal that I wrote while I was there. And so it was a wonderful learning experience to be at Columbia. I think the staff was not sure when I first got there, is he going to be able to deal with this different environment? But another thing I learned from Nancy is that you don't sit in your office and just do what, you know, your business. I was at the reference desk. I was at the circulation desk. I was, you know, up to my elbows in everything. And I think that showed them that I knew what I was doing, and I was a part of the team and working with them, so that when I suggested something, it came from, you know, that experience, not from, you know, someone on high giving an idea. So it worked out very well at Columbia.
So when and how did you decide that you were ready for your first directorship?
You know, after about 5 years, 6 years, it's sort of natural to be thinking, okay, where am I going from here? And so I looked around. You know, I was keeping my... And I talked to Jim Hoover a lot and got a lot of thoughts from him about what would be the right jobs to apply for. You know, not applying for any directorship that opened. I mean, actually, before I left Golden Gate, Nancy had gone on sabbatical and then was retiring before she went on to San Diego. And, you know, they offered me that directorship. And, you know, I knew, no, that's not where, that will take me in one direction. I had a choice of that directorship or the assistant director at Columbia. And I wanted to go towards Columbia because I wanted to learn more about a great library. And so, you know, I talked to Jim as jobs open, and yeah, you don't want to do that. Yeah, that's a pretty good opportunity. So I had applied for the directorship at, the first directorship was at Colorado, and didn't get that. Barbara Bittenliff was the associate and was a wonderful, you know, candidate, and they selected her. And then I tried SMU, and Gail Daly, another wonderful librarian, got that. And then Oklahoma opened up, and Jim had been associate at Oklahoma, and they have a wonderful, Lolly had been director at Oklahoma. They'd had a number of leaders in the profession at Oklahoma. And so I thought, well, Oklahoma will be much like when I lived in Michigan, you know, I can handle a small college town, and I got Oklahoma. And learned a lot that I had not learned in any of the other jobs about budgeting. You know, you don't, as an associate, you often don't do budgets. So that was how I spent a lot of my time during my 2 years at Oklahoma, was learning how to create spreadsheets and budget to the nearest penny. Also really supervising staff in terms of I have the final word for hiring and firing, which you don't necessarily as the associate. And staff conflicts, and dealing with, you are the one that the faculty come to when there is a problem. It was also an interesting time. It was the time during the Anita Hill situation at OU, and so we had a lot of frenetic things going on at the time.
Was the library involved in that? Did you get calls when that was going on? Or?
Well, to some degree, I mean, one of our storerooms was the place where they stored all of the mail that she got. I mean, you wouldn't believe how much mail she got. It was incredible. And the significant other of one of my librarians was involved with helping her catalog all the mail and get it in order. She used our facility sometimes for press conferences. So it was an interesting time. And I learned a lot, but Oklahoma was not what I thought it might be. And after a couple of years, I said, I really need to get back to a place where I don't have to drive, where I, have a lot of opportunities. And so I learned a lot. I love the people there, but I really needed to get back to the East Coast.
Now, when you made that decision, you were not yet tenured, correct?
Right.
So
Right.
what made you decide to take that risk at that time instead of waiting to be tenured and then applying?
Well, GW opened up, and it was a wonderful opportunity. I was looking at a couple other jobs at the time, but GW, my dean, Dean Swank, knew Jack Friedenthal, and said good things about him. And I just, it really, I think, made no difference to me in terms of a tenure decision. I'd have to try for tenure here. And the other nice thing is that when I came to GW, they crafted my contract specifically to what I wanted to do. At OU, they had the traditional writing requirement and teaching and all that. Jack crafted a contract for me that was specifically designed for a library director. No requirement of teaching, no requirement of writing, requirements for balancing budget, collegiality, maintaining staff, and so it was ideal for what a law library director should do.
Now, did you request that, or did they have that in place before you came?
They crafted it for me. So I've shared it with a number of other library directors along the years who were wondering, how do I get tenure without, because, and it's sad, it's a comment on today's world that in so many institutions, to get around making a librarian a member of the faculty, they say, well, you're going to have to meet the writing and teaching requirements as well as run the library. And I'm sorry, but I think they do that just to avoid making librarians members of the faculty, and it's criminal. I'm a strong supporter of tenure for library directors without those requirements. We are scholars as much as the doctrinal, it's just in different areas. And what we do as library directors is as critical to the goals of the institution as the teaching faculty. Pardon me for getting off on a diatribe there, but I'm a strong believer in that. And as I say, here at GW, they crafted it perfectly for what I wanted to pursue.
That's fantastic. Now, when you came, did you think you would stay here as long as you have?
I've been here 20 plus years. I've never lived any place that long. I mean, I left home at 18 to go to college. I lived in Michigan 12 years. I did not, and during the time here, I've had offers from other institutions, but every time GW was able to convince me to stay here, that they would support what I wanted to do to build the type of library that I envisioned.
And though I know you still have many more things that you want to accomplish, up until
Yes.
this stage, what would you name as your greatest accomplishments to date at GW?
Okay. When I arrived at GW, we had 5 dual degree librarians. We had a acquisition budget that was, maybe 50th out of 100 and however many there were. The acquisitions for many years had been not maintained because of the budget. And I did not do this all myself, but it was with the assistance of the law school and the deans, and the ABA involved in making the university let us keep more of our funding. So that now we have 15 dual degree librarians instead of 5. We have a staff of 42. We have an acquisitions budget that is always in about the top 5 or 6 in the country. For 12 years running, we had the largest monograph budget of any law library in the country. And I believe that we have developed, I think, one of the outstanding research law libraries in the country. We're not Berkeley or Columbia. We haven't been doing it for as long as they have. But we have an outstanding international and foreign law collection. We have a fantastic rare book collection that I think is probably one of the top 5 academic rare law book collections in the country. We have some good endowments. We have good support from the law school. Even during hard times, I cut back, but we still have the funds to do what I need to do to continue that tradition.
Is there anything that you had planned to do that you didn't do, either because you just changed paths or because there wasn't funding to do it?
No. Space is an issue here at GW. The staff has grown, the collection has grown. We are limited in terms of how much space we have. I've come up with a number of plans over the years, talked to the deans about moving here, moving there. At one point there was a thought of moving us across the street to a new facility there. And I have another plan. If the law school ever gets a room, we might go up into some other offices. We could do that with the elevators. But so that's the one thing we haven't done. I still keep working away at it, but it's the one thing that we haven't accomplished yet. We have right now about 4,000 boxes of books off-site. I've had to split staff into different areas. We've lost lots of conference rooms to growing staff. The student spaces are much nicer. We have great furniture in all the spaces, but we need more. And that's sort of the one goal that I have yet to achieve, but that's sort of beyond our power at this point.
So switching gears a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to move away from you to those who inspired you. You already mentioned Nancy and
Mm-hmm.
Jim. Are there any others that you would name as mentors?
Well, Mrs. Hickok, the reference librarian at Michigan State University. There are the great leaders in the profession. I wish I could speak like Bob Baring. I had him for advanced legal research. I wish I had his oratory skills. I wish I had Margaret Leary's skills at organization. I wish I had Michelle Wu's drive. There are many people who inspire me. But in terms of my supervisors, Nancy certainly, and Jim, and Mrs. Hickok. She will, Florence Hickok, but she will always be Mrs. Hickok to me. So
you also have a tremendous record of commitment to professional service. You have served as member or chair of multiple AAL committees and task forces, and have been particularly active with the ABA. Notably within the ABA's section of legal education and admissions to the bar, you have served on the accreditation committee and the standards review committee. Most recently, you served as the chair of a site inspection team. Could you describe the professional activities of which you are most proud?
Well, I think that there are maybe 2 of which I am very proud. I've not been as active in AALL as I was when I was at Columbia and OU, because I've become more involved in ABA and AALS. But when I was active, when I was chair of the Contemporary Social Problems, SIS, I'm proud of some of the activities that we did when I was chair there. We put forth a resolution on comparable worth when Bob Baring was president, and that was adopted. We put forth the amendment to add sexual orientation to the non-discrimination policies of the association, and that passed. So those were scary times for me. Those were my first time standing up in front of the whole AALL and putting forth things that were controversial. But with the support of, and Lolly Gassaway was president at the time of the sexual orientation amendment, with the support of wonderful presidents of AALL and the support of the SIS, putting forth controversial things that were adopted. So I'm proud of that. And I am very proud of the work that I did on the accreditation committee. I was on the committee for 6 years. That's the most you can serve. And those, I think, were the best 6 years I've ever had in an organization. If anybody ever gets a chance to work on the accreditation committee, it is a wonderful, draining, exhausting, frustrating experience. But it is, I learned so much about the workings of law schools, outside of libraries. I learned the ABA standards by heart, so that when I was chair of a inspection team recently, I knew what goes into a report. For example, if something comes up that is a scandal at the school, is it in any way affecting what the school does under the standards? Because I've been on teams where something happened during a visit and it kind of took control of the whole visit and grew out of proportion. I was able to say, look, let's look at the standards. This is what we're dealing with. So yes, we mention it, but in this context. And so those 6 years really, I think, enabled me to be an effective chair, and I look forward to doing more of that, because every time I go on a site inspection, I've been on about a dozen, I learn something. I grow from the experience. I meet new colleagues, and I think it was especially so first time as a chair.
So from your experience with the ABA, is there, or are there any tips that you would give to newer directors that you've learned?
Well, certainly read the rules, the standards. I did not really know the importance of the standards until I got so involved, especially the accreditation committee. Learn the standards, and work with colleagues. Don't take the inspection experience as a threat. Look upon it as a way to grow. And I welcome calls from people saying, what do you think about, what we're doing under this standard? And I always preface, I'm not speaking as a member of the AC. This is just my own view. But I'm happy to share my thoughts. There are a lot of us senior members of the profession who, can offer some advice. So don't feel that you have to reinvent the wheel. Feel free to contact somebody, reach out from out of the blue, drop an email to somebody saying, you don't really know me, but I'd like to ask you this question. So I feel so blessed to have stumbled onto this profession of law librarianship. I might have been a different kind of librarian, I might have been an English teacher, but the community of law librarians is so wonderful, and there's so much we can do working together and with each other. And so that would be my advice to a new director, is use the people around you, learn from them.
That's great advice.
So,
as we near the conclusion of this
Mhm.
interview, I just want to check with you to see if there's anything you would like to add or that we haven't covered.
One thing, you asked what I was proud of here at GW, and I am proud of the collection that we've built and the services that we've provided. I don't think I mentioned, I am also proud of, not for necessarily what I've done, but I take joy in the good people that have gone through here and the things that they've done with their lives. And, you know, it's as much their effort as mine. But, I mean, I know Roy Mirsky sent tons of people out to be directors. I'll never be Roy Mirsky. And Jim Hoover sent a few of us out to be directors. But there is joy in seeing people that have come your way succeed. And the ones that have gone, and the ones who are still here, who have succeeded, who could be directors any place. That is the other thing that brings joy and pride to me.
And as someone who was mentored by you and who had you as their first director, I will tell you that I think that is fully reciprocated in terms of the appreciation we have for everything and all the leadership that you've given to us. So on that note, let me thank you, Scott, on my behalf and that of our colleagues with whom I am working on this history, Pat Kehoe, Frank Hudek, and Dick Spinelli, for participating in today's conversation. Your insights, the information that you have shared, and the stories you have told will make a valuable contribution to the Oral History of Law Librarianship series on Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf on High Online.
Thank you.